Hello, today we're going to explore why Henry VIII decided to take control of the church in England. Now, let's just let that sink in for a little bit. So you've got the King of England, and he basically says, I am now going to tell everybody how to pray. I am now going to be the one who guides you to heaven or hell. Not the Pope anymore, but me, the King. Okay, so this is a huge event in the history of our country, and some historians think that when Henry VIII took control of the Church of England, it set our history on a different course to the history of the rest of England. And some historians think that we can trace the ideas of Brexit all the way back to this event in history. So it's a really important part of our history. Just before I carry on, Henry VIII, you'll see in this slide, the 8th is VIII, so those are Roman numerals. So the V is how the Romans used to write 5, and the I is how the Romans used to write 1. So 5 plus 3 ones is 8. So I'm sure you've come across this before, but I just thought I'd point it out. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at why Henry VIII decided to take control of the church in England. And we're going to think about whether Henry actually did this, whether he changed the whole course of history because of love. Is this the greatest love story that this country has ever seen? Did he alter the course of history for the woman that he loved? Or was it some other reasons? So some historians say that maybe it wasn't love. Maybe he actually did it because he was greedy for power and he wanted more power. Other historians say no, actually he had financial reasons to do it. He did it for money. And other historians actually say no, Henry VIII did this because he was a religious person and he cared for the souls of the people of England and he wanted to ensure they went to heaven. So this is why he took control of the Church of England. So in this video I'm going to be discussing why historians think that there are those 4 reasons why he took control of the Church in England, and also to give you a bit of historical background about why he did it. Whilst you're following on, what would be a really good thing to do is to make some notes either in OneNote or on a piece of paper. And when I come across something where I say actually this shows that Henry VIII did this for love, that you jot something down about what it's got to do with love. If I say it's something to do with his religion, to do with faith, you jot down what those key points are. And then when you finish watching this video, I'm going to want you to really consider what was the main driving force for Henry VIII taking control of the Church of England. Now this is quite an old PowerPoint that I'm sharing with you from my from deep in the Stania archives. So as you can see here, Henry VIII, poor chap's a little bit digitised here. So I hope this is a bit of a history lesson what PowerPoint used to look like. So why did Henry VIII take control? I just moved myself up there. Of the church in England. There we go, just so you can see that. Right, so first of all, we'll start a bit of historical background. Now, when Henry came to the throne in 1509, everybody in Europe, including England, was a Catholic. And we've talked a lot about the medieval church. So the Pope's the head of the church. Services are in Latin. Churches, as you can see from this example here, are incredibly beautiful places. The idea is that when you go into a church, it's like heaven on earth. And when Henry VIII came to the throne, this is how everybody in Europe worshipped. And here's a picture of one of the popes from the time. Now, Henry VIII, when he came to the throne in 1509, was a firm believer in the Catholic Church. He was, he thought the Pope was amazing. He wanted to do great work for the Pope. Now, at the time in Germany, more about this in a second, there's a chap called Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King was named after Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a German scholar who lived in Germany in the 15th century. And this Martin Luther, he began to criticise the Pope, and he began to criticise the Catholic Church. And Henry VIII was so shocked by this that he actually wrote a long essay, which he had printed in one of the printing presses, defending the Pope and saying actually that Catholicism was a wonderful thing. And the Pope was so impressed with this that he gave Henry VIII this title of Defender of the Faith. And this early painting of Henry VIII shows him receiving this honour. And on that little piece of paper in front of him is actually the award coming from the Pope. I think it should just be noted at this time as well that Henry VIII, when he came to the throne in 1509, was a young, sporting, athletic guy. Not how we kind of think of him, how he became in his later life, but he was seen as this kind of ideal man at the time. He was well read, he could speak foreign languages, he could hunt, he was good on the battlefield, and he was a very religious person as well. And so he won this award, Defender of the Faith. And this award, Kings and Queens of England still hold this title. So you can see this is an old PowerPoint, this is an old pound coin, but you probably might have seen these ones. But have a look on new pound coins as well. So here we have our current Queen, Elizabeth II. It says it's got DG, which the initials for the Latin words thanks be to God. And then we have Reg, as in Regina, which is the Latin for Queen. And then you see FD. And that FD are the initials for Fide Defensor, or Defender of the Faith. So it's a title that our monarchs still have today. However, by 1534, okay, so a few decades into his reign, Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church. And Henry was now the one who was deciding how he believed people should pray, not the Pope. He'd basically gone over to the ideas of Martin Luther, who he'd previously criticised, and said, actually, I think some of your ideas are right. I'm going to make myself head of the church and no longer listen to the Pope. So the big question is, what went wrong? Well, there are kind of several reasons why things went wrong between Henry and the Pope. The first thing that went wrong is that Henry really wanted a son and an heir. So that word heir is somebody who rules the throne after you die. So his dad, Henry's dad, who was also called Henry VII, had fought hard to establish the Tudor family as the ruling family, the ruling dynasty. And he'd set up secure finances and everything. And Henry was, wanted to make sure that his dad's hard work hadn't been in vain, that the Tudor family lived on. He didn't want the country to plunge back into civil war as it had done during the War of the Roses. So he wanted to make sure he had a son, so that there's somebody clearly in line to the throne when he died. If he had a daughter, then people didn't really accept women as rulers, and they thought they might be weak, and because of the sexist attitudes of the day, and so that might lead to their rule being challenged, and it might lead to civil war. So he wanted a son, a male heir. And so one of when he came to the throne in 1509, he married the beautiful Catherine of Aragon. Now, she was a Spanish princess. She'd actually been married to Henry's brother, but Henry's brother had died young, and Henry's dad, Henry VII, had arranged for Henry to now marry his brother's widow. The Pope didn't really like this idea, but Henry VII, pleaded with him, and the Pope said, "Okay, it's not really right that he's going to marry his brother's wife, but I suppose so," and he let it happen. Now, Henry VIII was delighted for this. So even though Catherine Aragon was a few years older than him, people think that actually he was absolutely besotted with her. He was deeply in love with her. He probably even fancied her when his brother was married to her, but he was married to the beautiful Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon, though, had the only child that she'd given birth to that had survived, she'd had many miscarriages, was a daughter called Mary. And this was by the sort of 1530s, after Henry had been on the throne for a few decades, was looking like a bit of a problem, because life expectancy was quite short. Didn't know when he was gonna die, and so he was getting quite worried, the fact that he didn't have a male heir. And it appeared that Catherine was getting older. This is how Catherine, a portrait from Catherine in the 1530s, was getting older, and because of the number of miscarriages that she had, she probably wasn't going to be able to have any more children with him. So Henry needed to have another child. He needed to marry another woman who could give him a son and heir. And so this meant that Henry needed to have a divorce from Catherine. I think the love had gone out of their marriage as well. By the 1530s, there was quite a bit of acrimony between them. But the main reason why Henry wanted a divorce was so that he could marry another woman, and so he could have an heir, a male heir, which would actually make Henry VIII's position more powerful. He'd have more power because it'd be clear who's going to rule after him, and it would be clear that they needed to do what Henry VIII told them to, because his son would boss them about as well. The second reason why things went wrong between Henry and the Pope was that Henry had met this lady called Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn was a young lady at his court. Henry had actually been having an affair with Anne's sister, but that's another story. But Henry had actually fallen for Anne Boleyn, and that's a lovely little animation there. So I just get the cupids little fluttering down there. There we go. So he'd fallen in love with Anne Boleyn, and by 1533, Anne was pregnant. But unfortunately, Henry was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Now, Henry had visited all of the best astrologers of the time, and as we've talked about before, people thought that astrology was a science at the time and could be used to explain events like the Black Death. So Henry had gone to all of the top astrologers, and a lot of astrologers had assured him that the way that the planets had lined up and the way the stars were in the sky, that Anne's child was going to be a son. Now, this is a problem because Henry's not actually married to Anne Boleyn, and so he needs to ensure that he's married to Anne Boleyn when Anne Boleyn gives birth, so that the son is his what we call legitimate child. So he's not married out of wedlock, it's not born out of wedlock. So therefore, he will definitely be the person who follows Henry when he dies. But Henry was also, I don't think you should underestimate, Henry was also deeply in love with Anne Boleyn, and he was no longer in love with Catherine of Aragon. And so actually one of his main drivers in his actions was actually to be Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn was a smart young lady. She actually said to Henry, look, I'm not going to kind of move into and be a mistress to you like my sister had been. If you would like to be with me, if you would like to live with me and have life with me, you're going to have to make me your wife. I'm going to want to be queen if you want to do that. So she was a smart cookie, and so this is another driving factor. Henry wanted to be with her, wanted her to be his wife, and so wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon. And there was a third reason why things weren't going so well with Henry and the Pope. Now, a myth that you've probably been taught in another school that you've been to, I won't name names, is that actually the Pope doesn't give divorces, and that's why Henry made himself head of the church and got himself divorced. Now, that is just nonsense. That is not true. The Pope had given many monarchs divorces in the past. Okay, throughout the centuries, it was one of the things that popes did. So why was it that the Pope didn't give Henry a divorce in this instance? Now, Henry, when he approached the Pope for a divorce, he didn't think there'd be a problem at all. I mean, this was just normal procedure. Kings divorce. I think we've talked before about how, for example, the King of France had divorced Eleanor of Aquitaine before she married Henry II of England, and then gave birth to Richard the Lionheart and King John. There've been divorces all over the time. So Henry thought there wouldn't be a problem, but there was. So. The Pope at the time was actually a prisoner, and he was the prisoner of this chap here called Charles V of Spain. Now, Charles V of Spain was the Emperor of Spain, and he was probably the most powerful person in the whole of Europe. Spain was becoming incredibly rich at the time, and they had actually conquered the parts of Italy where the Pope lived, where Rome was. And so, even though the Pope still lived in his grand palace, he wasn't in a dungeon or anything, he was effectively a prisoner of Charles V of Spain. Now, Charles V of Spain was the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. Sorry, I'm in the way of Catherine of Aragon there. I'll put myself in place of the Pope. There we are. There was Catherine of Aragon. So the Pope wasn't allowed to grant Henry a divorce, because basically Charles said, don't you dare. Because Charles thought that if Henry divorced Catherine of Aragon, it would bring disgrace on his family, and they'd be sort of the laughing stock of Europe, and he didn't really want that. And this was really the foundation of problems that the Tudor family had with Spain, that was to last for many decades. So that is why the Pope didn't grant Henry a divorce, because he was a prisoner of Charles V of Spain, and he was the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, who Henry wanted to divorce, and this brings shame on the family, right? And that is one of the key reasons why the divorce wasn't given. So there was another reason, though. It wasn't just the fact that Catherine couldn't have children anymore. It wasn't just the fact that Henry was in love with Anne Boleyn. It wasn't just the fact that Anne Boleyn was pregnant. It wasn't just the fact that the Pope wouldn't give a divorce. There was also other things happening in Europe at the time. And a growing number of people were becoming what became known as Protestants. And this movement, what was also called Protestantism, was started by this man, Martin Luther, who was in Germany. And we'll talk about this in future lessons, but in a nutshell, Martin Luther said, look, the Catholic Church at the time has become corrupt. They're doing things like selling indulgences or selling pardons, so people pay a lot of money for a piece of paper, which gives them less time in purgatory and they can get to heaven quicker. And Martin Luther said that this is just wrong. I want to get to heaven. I want to get to know God personally. I want to be able to read the Bible myself rather than have someone in the church read it to me in Latin, and so on. So he had lots of complaints and protests against the church. And the Pope clearly kind of excommunicated him. But Martin Luther began to get lots of followers, lots of people who were protesting about the Catholic Church at the time, and these became known as Protestants. And pamphlets like this, they weren't as digitized as this, but these are images showing the Pope having, on the right hand side, the Pope having lots of heads, some of them being the devil's heads, and all these sort of images were passed around at the time about how bad the Catholic Church was, how bad the Pope and the papacy had become. And a couple of Henry's advisors were also Protestants, and there were quite a few people who became Protestants in England during Henry's reign. And they began to say, look, the Catholic Church at the time has got problems. There's a lot of people, many sort of priests aren't behaving quite in a holy way. And maybe the Pope, this ruler who lives in Rome, has got too much power in England. And his advisors started saying to him, look, just think about it, Henry. Look, the Pope is interfering in your marriage plans. What right has he, somebody in Rome, to tell you, the King of England, who you should marry or not? Also, when people they had to give a tenth of everything they owned to their local church to make sure the church can run effectively. It's called the tithe. And so some of this money or their goods that people gave to the church would be taken out of England and be sent to Rome. And so these Protestants said to Henry, they said, look, the church, they're taking all these taxes from English people and they're sending them off to Rome. And why should the Pope, who's a foreign church leader, have so much control over England? And I think it's quite interesting. Look at this through the lens of Brexit, because if you think about a lot of the arguments that supporters of Brexit put forward, it rings similar to this, doesn't it? Why should the European Union take English taxes to spend in Brussels? Why should the European Union have a say in the laws that are made in this country? Now, two of Henry's advisors, one of them was called Thomas Cromwell. Some of you might have heard of a book called Wolf Hall, or if not, maybe some of your parents have been reading a book called Wolf Hall. And Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel is really famous books, won lots and lots of awards, and it's all about this chap Thomas Cromwell and how he advises Henry in this time in England. So it's quite a hefty read, but maybe it's something you want to put on your reading list for some point in the future. So one of Henry's advisors, Thomas Cromwell, and another one, Thomas Cranmer. Now this isn't Gandalf, this is Thomas Cranmer. Okay, don't get the two confused. Very similar. They were both Protestants. Okay, they both thought that Martin Luther's teachings were a good idea, and so they had Henry's ear, and they said to him, look, maybe the Catholic Church does have too much control in this country. Let's give you an idea. So Cromwell and Cranmer, they said to Henry, look, if England becomes a Protestant country and you, Henry, become head of the Church of England, because this is what Martin Luther was saying. He was saying, look, we can't have the Pope as head of the Church anymore. Maybe kings and princes should control the Church in their own area. And remember, at the time, they saw kings as being appointed by God. So if a king won a battle on a battlefield, it was because God was on his side. If the Tudor family took the control of the throne of England, it's because God was on their side. So people already saw kings as having some kind of divine right to rule already. But more about that in a few lessons' time. So they said, look, Henry, why don't you follow these ideas of Martin Luther, and why don't you make yourself head of the church? Because if you do that, then you would be able to divorce Catherine and marry Anne, because you'd just be able to grant yourself the divorce because you'll be head of the church. So not only would you solve that problem of not having a male heir, you could marry the woman that you're in love with, Anne Boleyn, and you could do it before Anne Boleyn gives birth to the son and heir that will make you more powerful. So Henry was thinking, well, yes, that's quite a good idea. But that wasn't the only thing that was motivating him. That wasn't the only thing that was motivating him. Oh, sorry. Here's a nice animation. Sorry, I was just a bit distracted there. Someone trying to contact me. So there we go. I'll just do that again. So he could divorce Catherine, and he could marry Anne. But he could also collect church taxes, and he could close down all of the Catholic institutions in the land. So all those monasteries and nunneries where monks and nuns prayed, he could take control of them and just sell them off. And with all that land, with all the roofs, all the roofs, all the gold inside these places, he could sell it off and make huge amounts of money for the church. So Henry began to see that actually maybe this wasn't such a bad idea. So in 1534, Henry went to Parliament and he said to them, I want you to pass this law called the Act of Supremacy. The Act of Supremacy. I will be in supreme control of the church. And Parliament, who weren't a very powerful institution at the time, they passed this law and they said, okay, Henry, you are now head of the Church of England. All church services are no longer going to be in Latin, they're going to be in English, and copies of the Bible aren't going to be in Latin, they're going to be in English, and they're going to be placed in every church. And then Henry took all of the monasteries and the nunneries, he took their property, he sold it to landlords and merchants to get huge amounts of money. And any Catholics that didn't accept the changes, they were executed. Even Henry's friend, Thomas More. Now, Thomas More was a devout Catholic. He was one of the great thinkers of the age. He was a great astrologer, he was a great philosopher, and him and Henry had been really close friends for decades. In fact, Thomas More was so fond of Henry that he gave Henry his favourite telescope. I know. But when Henry made himself head of the church and said, look, we're no longer Catholics, or we're going to be Protestants, and I'm going to be head of the church in England, anybody who says that that's not the case, you're actually committing treason, because you're going against what I want, so I'm going to have to chop your head off. Now, Thomas More was very religious, and he said, look, Henry, I believe that the Pope is the head of the church. I believe he's sent by God to tell us how to pray. And actually, if I say you're head of the church, I'll burn in hell forever. So, you're threatening me with having my head chopped off, so I could say, all right, you can be head of the church, but I'll be burning hell forever, or you can chop my head off and I'll spend eternity in heaven. And that was the choice that Thomas More made. So he said to Henry, I do not accept you as head of the church. And Henry had his head chopped off. And so Henry also divorced Catherine, married Anne Boleyn, the woman he loved. She still hadn't given birth. It was just in time, because 3 months later, he was really hopeful for a son and heir. This was going to cement his power. 3 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby. Oh, it's a baby girl. Right, well, we'll leave the story of Henry VIII there. And hopefully you've made a note of quite a few reasons why Henry VIII made himself head of the church in England. Just to summarise, he did it out of love, because he loved Anne Boleyn. He passionately wanted to be with her. He wanted to spend his life with her. He did it to become more powerful, because if he had a son and heir, it would make his family, the Tudor family, more powerful, and so make him more powerful. It would also give him power over the church in England, and as we've seen before, like the arguments that John had with the Pope, that actually the Catholic Church did cause problems in England, so it would end that problem, and Henry would have more power, not only with what he told people to do, but what people believed as well. Some people think that actually Henry did it because he was religious. He believed in these Protestant ideas, and so therefore he, he actually wanted to make this change because of his own faith. Because many historians say, well, he might have been a Catholic, but actually, look, his ideas were changing, his beliefs were changing. Why would he have Protestant advisors if he wasn't a Protestant in some way himself? So there might have been his religious reasons, but also there's lots of financial reasons, aren't there? He became so much richer because he made himself head of the church. He could collect church taxes, he could shut down the monasteries and nunneries, and sell off all of their stuff, and it actually made, for a short term, him very, very wealthy. So that's what I want you to think about. What do you think really drove Henry's actions? Was it because he was deeply in love with Anne Boleyn? Was it because he was such a deeply religious Protestant? Was it because he just wanted more power? Or was it just for the money? Was it all about just getting a bit richer? And that is what I want you to think about now and reach your own conclusion of.